Welcome to the Keg River webinar on irrigation and soil amendment, and we're really excited to be able to share this with you. Irrigation is a game changer, especially in the world of climate change and where we've been experiencing some drought in a lot of areas of North America. Irrigation is really key to the productivity of agriculture across North America. And in a lot of areas, irrigation is expanding. In Western Canada, we have more and more irrigation projects in Saskatchewan and in Alberta. However, irrigation has been very, very prominent in the United States, and we're very, very lucky to have with us today experts in the area of soil chemistry and fertility, crop nutrition, and irrigation. Dr. Terry Tindall and I go way back. Terry is a retired senior agronomist with Simplot. He's worked around the world, and he's done a lot of global research in soil and fertility and nutrient management, and just a real wealth of information as it pertains to the utilization of irrigation agriculture as it pertains to food production. Dr. Charles Sanchez, he's a graduate of Iowa State University and done a lot of work in Yuma and Maricopa. And just the other day, him and I had a beer together in Maricopa, Arizona. So that was kind of cool. He's a foremost expert on irrigation, recently retired. I don't know if that's true. And done a lot of work with the University of Arizona, soil and water expertise, and a lot of work with environmental toxins as it relates to the utilization of amendments and fertilizer and things like that. Brooke Bateman is with Keg River. And Brooke has got background in the product, the Keg River product. He's in charge of sales for Keg River for the U.S. Midwest and northern states and Canada. He's very knowledgeable about degradable sulfur. We're going to do that. My name is Robert Saik, and I'm the CEO and founder of AgVisor Pro. And AgVisor Pro is a connectivity platform that connects those seeking agricultural advice with knowledge and experts who can solve and answer problems and questions. So we're going to turn over to the topic at hand, which is irrigation. Now, we're going to, whether or not you're an irrigated farmer or irrigated agronomist, you're going to learn a lot from this session. We're going to start off with talking with Charles about what is irrigation and what are the kinds of irrigation. And I know this could take the whole hour by itself, but in general, Charles, can you sum up the types of irrigation that are being employed with the farmers you work with in North America and what that looks like?
Yeah, crops have an evapotranspiration demand, and each crop has a characteristic demand. For example, lettuce needs about 11 inches. Cotton needs about 3.6 acre feet. So you have to irrigate for sustainability. But beyond meeting the crop's evaporation transpiration demand, there's other beneficial uses. It could be for managing salts. It could be for frost control. It could be for tillage. And salt management's of paramount importance in our area. So we always have to irrigate extra to maintain salt balance. Now, the irrigation systems utilized here range. In the Yuma area, they use a very efficient furrow irrigation system, short runs, large heads, low intake soils, and their efficiencies, even with the furrow irrigation, the surface irrigation scenario is over 90% typically. In central Arizona, it's a little harder. They have longer runs, higher intake soils. They can't get nearly as efficient with furrow. It's still used to some extent, but they're beginning to switch more and more to center pivots, linears, some drip irrigation. And because of the water crisis in Arizona, the state of Arizona is subsidizing growers to convert to more efficient systems. So there's a conversion going on in parts of the state where they're currently not irrigating efficiently by surface irrigation.
So we have different types of irrigation: surface, we have pivot, we have drip irrigation, and then we have different sources of water. Let's get that on the table right now as well. There's a couple sources of water that are available for irrigation, and that really determines how the growers have access to water. What are the sources of water?
Well, the Colorado River is a major source, and the Colorado River drainage is gypsiferous shales. So although it's saline, it has good ratios of calcium to sodium. So you don't have to treat that water today. Now, as drought climate change models predict changes in the chemistry of the water, they may have to. But Much of Arizona, at least central Arizona, has been cut off from Colorado River water as part of the drought mitigation plan, and they're having to use groundwater. And the groundwater is more problematic. It has higher carbonates, it has more deflocculators such as sodium and potassium. It has less flocculators such as calcium and magnesium. So to remain sustainable using groundwater, they're going to have to increasingly use water treatments and amendments.
Okay, we're going to get into that. Terry, you've been working in with irrigation on all kinds of crops and a lot of potatoes in Idaho, of course, JR Simplot Company. There was a quote I heard a long time ago, no civilization has ever survived irrigation, which I thought was an interesting quote because you have to deal with that. So what are some of the challenges, long-term challenges that growers and agronomists need to be aware of as they're implementing irrigation over the long term?
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's and building a little bit about what Dr. Sanchez was talking about. You know, we've got water sources that are available, and fortunately for the Pacific Northwest, most of those water sources are coming um, out of reservoirs, snowpack. When you have a lot of snow in the mountains, and we're looking at it every year as far as snowpack related to water and then water delivery systems. We're always looking at the not only the amount of water that's being delivered, but the quality of that water as well. For the most part, in the Pacific Northwest, water is characteristically good without a lot of need for applying amendments. One of the challenges that we have with irrigation is just the changes. Historically we had long runs of irrigation water, and now most of our irrigation of potatoes is under center pivot. But just because you've got center pivot irrigation and you've got a great opportunity to deliver exactly the water that you have, there are challenges. There are so many challenges. I was just looking at some images of a center pivot, and it was just a disaster in regards to the lack of proper water delivery. So growers need to work on water amounts being applied, making sure that the soils are well irrigated across their fields, sensing water amounts that are there. And it's like irrigation water, Rob, is the single greatest limiting factor for successful crop growth in the West. Working with subsurface water, getting pumps, into the groundwater, and many places you have to do it. The water is not very good. The water challenges. Some have a lot of boron. A lot of them are warm water, and so I would just say this: each irrigation system, you need to look at water carefully, identify the crop that you're irrigating, and time the water applications to meet the water use efficiency of that crop and the timing necessary for productive and high quality yields.
So Terry, back in the day when I had dark hair and I was young and I was traveling the Treasure Valley and Magic Valley and working in the elemental sulfur industry, we were actually working with elemental sulfur to help to increase water penetration and flocculation of soils. And so that I want to lead into Brooke here in a second, but let's just tee up
Okay.
the need for or the possibility of utilizing elemental sulfur in irrigated farming.
Yeah, so let's just talk about elemental sulfur and the sources and the needs. All crops need sulfur. They need it for crop production. You can look at ratios as far as the amount of available sulfur to the amount of nitrogen, and those can be calculated for potatoes, for onions, for canola, and each of those individual crops. So with that being stated, elemental sulfur is applied on almost every crop, high value crop. So you're looking at potatoes, for onions, for sugar beets, for irrigated corn. All these crops most of the crops, talking to growers yesterday and researchers at the famous Idaho potato meetings, elemental sulfur is applied on irrigated crops from around 100 pounds per acre up to 250 pounds per acre, not to get an immediate response for that given year, okay, but as part of the cropping system to deliver soluble sulfur as sulfate over a 2, 3, 4, 5 year period of time. It just becomes part of the cropping management practice to deliver elemental sulfur.
Okay, so that's a good tee up for Brooke. So the idea of elemental sulfur is to apply it and then have thiooxidants, thiobacillus, the bacteria in the soil, eat that elemental sulfur and essentially poop out or turn it into sulfuric acid that turns into sulfates. And so let's talk, Brooke, a little bit about how that process happens and talk a little bit about the characteristics of Keg River sulfur and how that particular product is separated from some of the other in the pack.
Well, I guess the main goal for us with an elemental sulfur product is to develop a product that delivers the form of sulfur that we need, elemental sulfur. It has to arrive at the field in a very fine sulfur form. That's what makes elemental sulfur agronomically viable. But to make that happen, you need to have the sulfur to be in a handy, low dust, granular form for all the transportation and blending that we need to do between us, the manufacturer, and the farmer's field. So I guess you could say that sulfur bentonite pastilles are an excellent vehicle to make that happen. But once applied to the field, as you said, the bentonite sulfur is activated by water, irrigation water in many cases, and it breaks down to fine particles, which are then processed by bacteria. Anyway, this application can be done at any time of the year. And in fact, fall application is very popular now. Winter, even over snow, is done routinely in spring or post-seeding broadcasting. Those all work very well.
Yeah, Rob, can I make a point here?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it just working off of what Brooke is saying, it's in order to be the most effective with elemental sulfur and the pastilles, the bentonite clay that disperses a fine particle of sulfur, for the most effective, it should be incorporated into the soil, whether that's in the fall or whether that's in the spring. I believe that's necessary. So that becomes the background level of successfully using elemental sulfur. And as I said, the application is up to 200, 250 pounds per acre of elemental sulfur being applied to these irrigated crops on an annual basis.
Right. So what Brooke was saying really is you have these pastille sulfurs that are Keg River sulfur is relatively dust free. It's easy to handle. You can take it and then you can broadcast it. And the broadcasting can really be done any time of the year. And then to Terry's point, a shallow incorporation is probably okay. And but you don't have to worry about the broadcast. I mean, it's not going to go on you. And Dr. Sanchez, we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between amending soil and amending water or treating water, because there are water treatments available and there are soil amendments available. And I'd like your take a little bit on, first of all, let's back up. Why would a person be concerned about trying to amend soil? Let's go there first.
Well, I think we have to go the other place first. If you have a problematic water, it will destroy your soil.
There you go.
So you can either treat the water or you can amend the soil. The water treatments are usually based on chemistry and stoichiometry. Amendments, you have to temper in economics. heavily because soils are very well buffered. If the world was perfect and all things were equal, if they were all equal, it would always make sense to proactively deal with the problem by treating your water. But that's not the case. There's economic and logistical limitations. I know a grower that knows he has a problematic water, but he broadcasts sulfur because his irrigators don't have the training to operate injection equipment and do the calculations and set it up correctly. So that's a logistical consideration. So does that address what you're after? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I think let's start there, and then let's talk a little bit about, a lot of Terry, we'll get into this in a second, but there are soils out there that are irrigated that have low sulfur levels, but there's a lot of soils irrigated out there that have high background soil sulfur levels, and still we're utilizing elemental sulfur to tackle something called sodium absorption ratio. So let's get into that a little bit deeper, Dr. Sanchez.
Okay, well, if water has high bicarbonates, it precipitates out the calcium in the water and in the soil water. And because the calcium precipitates the solid, the ratio of sodium to calcium goes up. And that causes dispersion because sodium's a deflocculator. Mm-hmm. So when you apply sulfur and it's oxidized and it creates sulfuric acid, it dissolves the calcium carbonate and makes gypsum. And therefore you have more soluble calcium, and you elevate the ratio of calcium to sodium, and your soil remains flocculated, and you preserve your infiltration.
Which is a good.
If you have soils that are collapsing, then the water won't infiltrate.
Absolutely, that's the first sign of a soil on its way to destruction, is you see infiltration problems.
Okay, Terry.
I'm here. Yes. Okay. I would say this. It's a fascinating process, and elemental sulfur becomes a key to many of these things because you've got other materials that can ameliorate the soil, addressing the sodium, from calcium sulfate to ferrous sulfate. All these are options. Elemental sulfur becomes the least expensive and, relatively speaking, the most effective application to help reduce the amount of sodium that's in the surface soil. Because I've seen this in the past, Rob. It's like your soil is not you take a soil sample and it's not classified as a sodic soil, but the surface of it still has elevated levels of sodium that can impact the infiltration. So the elemental sulfur is applied, and as Dr. Sanchez explained, it'll churn to sulfuric acid, which combines with the calcium. And if you can have the ability to leach that out, then that starts addressing some of the concerns of infiltration that can be a result of irrigation water taking place on some of your soils.
So if you take an irrigated soil and you think about that surface layer that you just mentioned, and you have soil that's wet and the evapotranspiration is pulling the water up into the atmosphere, you're leaving behind sodium and you're collapsing that surface. And Dr. Sanchez, in that area where you have soils where the surfaces collapse, then you can't penetrate the water, correct?
And to build on something Terry said, he says, even though it's not classified as a sodic soil, I want to stress that those tables and textbooks are arbitrary classifications. You'll have impeding infiltration long before you get to a SAR 15.
Right.
So long before you can have impeded infiltration with an SAR as low as 7. So it's of paramount importance to test your irrigation water and stay ahead of the situation, because that classification in the textbooks of 15 is just arbitrary.
Right. So
he's nothing in the practicing real world.
So you have way before SR 15, you should be already concentrating on looking at whether you
would already have infiltration problems.
All right. So Brooke, one of the things, Brooke, that I wanted to talk about with respect to Keg River sulfur is is a timed release of elemental sulfur. It doesn't all get flashed like ammonium sulfate. It releases over time. Can you explain a little bit about why that happens, the release over time?
Well, it's biologically mitigated after you apply the product. It's the bacteria then start to act on that. And one of the questions I get oftentimes is, what's the release rate that you can expect? And that's just another way to describe what's the oxidation rate of the elemental sulfur into a plant available sulfate. And the literature reflects that you would expect a 30 to 40% release rate per year for an application of sulfur. So I found that quite interesting when you said 250 pounds per acre per year is quite a heavy application of sulfur. But then what you have in a situation like that is you have now you have overlapping releases from last year's sulfur and now this year's sulfur, and some of 2 years back as well. So that provides a lot of substrate for soil bacteria to colonize and various levels of release. That's a very helpful scenario.
Well, you teed up that. So Terry, let's talk about bacterial oxidization of elemental sulfur, and let's talk a little bit about that priming up of that and how over time it starts to cook the sulfur or eat the sulfur from an elemental standpoint. Talk a little bit about this bacterial oxidization, which actually isn't necessary so much with ammonium sulfate, which is actually a good thing when it comes to elemental sulfur.
Yeah, I could address that. So in order for elemental sulfur to be converted into a sulfate form, which is the only form of sulfur that can be utilized by the plant, it has to be converted. Whether it's oxidized or it's consumed by thiobacillus. So thiobacillus will take the elemental sulfur, it consumes it, it breaks it down, and it's converted over a period of time. But in the early parts of my career, I would show so much caution in regards to applying elemental sulfur, and the thought that you were using it as a sulfur source for that year. Not so. This cropping system and sustainability allows the elemental sulfur to be broken down over a period of years. Yep. And so now in my career in Idaho, growers have been applying elemental sulfur every year, Rob, yep, for 30 years or more. And all of the commercial labs are recommending, elemental sulfur to be applied. And with that as a level, there's sulfur being available, sulfur being made available to growing crops every single year. Now, within a cropping system for immediate applications, and you mentioned this before, I'm going to just deliver these comments now. A common source is a soluble need for sulfur, and so the growers are going to apply elemental sulfur in the fall, incorporate it into their beds, and then in the spring they will come in with a soluble source of ammonium thiosulfate or potassium thiosulfate as part of the starter blend. So they're combining. They're smart enough to realize that they need both, and both sources become part of their overall plans for profitability.
Yeah, I find that, when you think about this from a long-term perspective, if you're going to start to utilize elemental sulfur as a farmer in your production, then for the first year, you might want to have a little bit of ammonium sulfate to prime that sulfate source. But after a while, the bacteria get going and it starts to work better. Dr. Sanchez, from a standpoint of working with elemental sulfur, making it perform, especially as you get down to your area, California, Arizona, where you have more desert-like climates, what are some of the considerations that you would have as you were looking at this as part of a agronomic practice?
Well, it comes down to economics. You tossed a Terry a while ago, do you need to inoculate or not? We never have had to.
Yep.
course, it slows down in the winter. So does nitrification, but our soils never freeze. So we have microbial activity all year at a reduced level, albeit in the winter than the summer, but it never shuts down entirely. Economics, Terry mentioned something that's important to stress. Sometimes it's tough to thread the needle on the economics for a crop, and that's our way of thinking typically. We want to charge out an expense to that crop margin. But these amendments are really an investment in sustainability of the soil. So they have to be amortized out over more than one crop. And and to what extent they can depends on the water quality you're using and your soil characteristics. So that's the most important thing, economics. And like Terry said, typically elemental sulfur is one of the most affordable products to use.
You're in our conversation that we had the other day on Monday, you said that you're increasingly become concerned about water quality. Can you comment a little bit about that?
Well, that's in central Arizona. They used to get access to surface water from the Colorado River through what's called the Central Arizona Project. A huge canal comes across the state and brought Colorado River water to central Arizona, but it's a lower priority water right. So now that we're in drought contingency, they don't get that surface water anymore, and they're using groundwater. And I have a lot of data from a lot of the source wells that these irrigation districts are now pumping, and they're problematic. And over the past 3 or 4 decades since they got CAP water, they forgot about that. They forgot that their waters were problematic. So I'm beginning to see problems across central Arizona, impeded infiltration, and I see the sodium absorption ratios going up, and they just have to relearn what their grandfather knew.
Oh,
Terry,
Rob, can I make a little bit of comments as well? And maybe it's a question to Charlie, because I've got it in my own mind. It's like, as you build up sodium and salt in a soil, and you only have a limited amount of water, then the question becomes, how much additional levels of irrigation water do you need to apply to leach out, of our systems, the accumulation of sodiums and salt?
It's based on sodium's a different deal, but salt, it's based on the crop salt tolerance. For a crop like lettuce, and lettuce is the most important crop in Arizona by far, it's very salt sensitive, and your required leaching is 20%. You have to apply 20% more than crop evapotranspiration. Now you take a crop like cotton that's very tolerant to salinity, your required leaching is only 5%. So you only have to apply 5% more water than what the crop needs for evapotranspiration.
So if I understand this correctly, we have to apply for lettuce enough water, not only to feed the lettuce, but enough water to also move the sodium out of the growing.
Not the sodium, the salts. Sodium's a different issue. Sodium destroys cell structure. Salts impact on osmotic effect. Okay. They're only related to each other by if you allow sodium to destroy your soil, you can't leach out your salts. You know what I mean? Sodium is a special case. The general effect of salinity is osmotic. Plants cannot take up water against this osmotic gradient. They expend energy that they would otherwise use for growth and reproduction. Sodium's a different deal. Sodium specifically destroys the soil.
Okay. And Terry, switching back up to the northern states and the surface water that's coming down, a lot of it you said is runoff from the mountains and caught in reservoirs, and that soil, that water is more, I'll call it more pristine, right? And it may not have as much sulfur in the water as soil water. Are you when you're doing a recommendation for a crop, how does sulfur fit into the utilization and the enhancement of other nutrients that are applied, nitrogen, etc.? How does sulfur help that crop?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question. And, historically, you've been looking at, how much sulfur to apply. So you take your soil test sulfur, which is the absolute worst of any test that you have out there. And then you're looking at the crop as you're growing, and you would say, well, I've got an estimation about the amount of water that, or the amount of sulfur needed for the particular crop. I know from my water sample how much sulfur is being applied, and you, excuse me, you try to have a balance in regards to how much sulfur you have in the soil, the amount of sulfur coming into the water, and the amount of sulfur that you should apply it as a fertilizer source. Um, and usually you could be looking at a ratio. Quite often, historically, they're saying that you should have 13 times more nitrogen than you have sulfur. So 1 part of sulfur to 13 parts of nitrogen. Historically, the recommendations that I'm seeing now coming out of the university is like for every 10 pounds of N, now it's 1 part of sulfur being applied. For onions, that ratio, yellow storing onions, these aren't the lovely sweet onions. It's more like 1 to 8. Canola is about 1 part of sulfur to 8 parts of nitrogen, more or less. So it's a balancing act to deliver the sulfur, to address the amount of nitrogen, and to make sure that you're following the 4 R's of nutrient management, the right source, timing, application, and the crop that's being planted.
And then the placement, yeah. So the interesting thing you said was from a soil sampling perspective, and when you consider soil sampling, you almost, my rule is if sulfur tests high, ask why, because you probably hit magnesium sulfate, calcium sulfate. You probably hit something when you're probing the soil and you spiked up your sulfur levels. And if it tests low, you go. And what I mean by that is that it's hard to get a low sulfur test. So if you end up with a low sulfur test on the soil, there's undoubtedly large parts of the soil that are suffering from sulfur deficiency. So
Sure.
Brooke, over to you back again. I want to talk a little bit about bentonite and how bentonite in Keg River results in that dispersion and that release rate. Can you talk a little bit about the technology that you guys have got built into Keg River?
Well, to your question, the quality of the bentonite is key, and the interesting thing is that there's many types of clay and many sources, and but yet the very few clays perform to the standard that we're aiming for, and by that I mean we need a clay that absorbs and swells properly, and the main objective with that is to have the swelling bentonite clay fracture the pastille to get very tiny sulfur particles, because then what we need is a very small average particle size distribution. The sulfur crystals at the end of that process of degrading with water have to be very, very small particle size and a high surface area exposed for easy microbial colonization. If the clay does its job, this results in an agronomically robust conversion rate to plant available sulfate. As I said before, very few clays do what we want them to do in that way. So we tested almost every clay that we could find, and through that testing, we observed that many clays degrade very poorly, or sometimes not even at all, even if there's ample water. So it really pays to use a good quality clay.
So that's very interesting, because you have two things that you're trying to accomplish at the same time with your Keg River sulfur. You're trying to develop a product that handles well, that has low dust characteristics during the handling process, and then once it hits the field, that's when the bentonite kicks in. And you're saying that there can be a variety of bentonite clay sources, and you want to make sure that you have one that's consistent and a high performer, right?
Yes, and I mean, there's internal reasons also. We need the clay to be consistently a nice powdered form to go through our filtering process and so on. But the agronomic side of that can't be ignored. I'd say we've tested some products that don't degrade very well, and that's why if you get the right clay source, then continue to work on a consistent basis. Unfortunately, the best clay is the most expensive from farthest away, but we kept on using that clay even though that there's some problems getting that clay.
Let's go ahead, Terry.
Oh, so yeah, Brooke. So I think this is fascinating as far as the bentonite clay going into the sulfur pastils, and so this is an engineering question, and I'm not an engineer, but is there a size fractionation that Keg River is trying to capture for the elemental sulfur? How it disperses. Yeah. So what is the size that your engineers are trying to track on or to focus as far as a goal on the elemental sulfur applications?
Well, I think what you're asking is what's the final particle size of the sulfur crystals after the product is degraded. We use the term degradability to describe how well the swelling bentonite clay fractures the pastille. And I've heard that the figure of 150 microns being thrown around. We've done some testing on that, and a high percentage. We have the 85 and 90% sulfur products. The 85 has more clay in it, and when we tested that, we found that over 80% of the final sulfur crystal size particles, over 80% were in the range of 150 microns or less. Anyway, there's a mathematical way to take that micron size and the particle size distribution and calculate surface area exposure. So smaller the particle size, the higher the surface area exposed to microbes.
Perfect. Thank you.
That's a great that was a great answer to that question too. Unscripted. So hey, let's talk about irrigation for a little bit. And Dr. Sanchez, we were talking about when I, as an agronomist, go to Yuma, Arizona and Maricopa, Arizona, and I see flood irrigation going on, and I'm going, geez, I don't know that that's a really efficient form of irrigation. Should we be doing it? Is water priced too cheap? Why are farmers flood irrigating when there's more efficient? I'll come to Terry's methodology up your way in a minute, but can you comment a little bit about what we're seeing when we're looking at those flooded fields, and talk a little bit about the difference in flooded fields between like a Yuma and a Maricopa?
Yeah. I'll answer that, but I want to close the door on the last question you threw at me.
Okay.
Sodium is a special case of salt management. So even if you're growing a crop like lettuce and you give it the 20% leaching requirement, if you're using a problematic water, a water that's high in bicarbonates or high in sodium, your leaching requirement does not solve your sodium problem. You still have to treat the water or amend the soil. The leaching requirement only addresses your salt issue. And if you have a water that's not problematic, you manage your salt issue. But if you're irrigating with a problematic water with a high adjusted sodium ratio reading, that water has to be treated, or the soil to which it's applied has to be amended.
So I just want
to make that perfectly clear.
So that's the difference between a sodic and a saline soil.
Well, and so soils can be saline and sodic. It's complicated, but again, I don't like those classification schemes in the textbook because the process is actually a continuum. It's not abrupt categories.
All right. Well, let's educate us a little bit about flood irrigation, why they do it, what the differences are, and the challenges. Okay.
The years ago, we devised these irrigation systems based on gravity and having rivers lent for that. And the Bureau of Reclamation had very good engineers, and these were very good systems. Now, in Yuma, where the soils have low intake, they're clay loams and silty clay loams. The intake rates are low. Steady state infiltration's about 10 inches a day. They have short runs, 600 feet at the most. They put about 30 gallons per minute into a furrow. They complete advance in a little over an hour. There you can irrigate very efficiently by furrow irrigation. And basin irrigation, they just shorten the borders. They can irrigate very efficiently. Now you come to other parts of the state, or you go into the Imperial Valley of California, some of those irrigation runs are half a mile or a quarter mile. Sometimes the soil intake rates are much higher. You cannot irrigate efficiently that way by surface irrigation.
So if I'm trying to picture this in my mind, you basically put water into a cookie pan, a cookie sheet, and you want the water to go all the way across the cookie sheet.
And
so
you want it to go fast because
yeah.
you have more infiltration opportunity time at the inlet end.
Yep.
So you want to apply it uniformly. And believe it or not, in those UMA-FURRO irrigation systems, the distribution uniformities are well over 90%.
But you said it's not the case down in Maricopa.
Oh, absolutely not. They're longer runs, they're higher intake soils. And like I said, you can only achieve those very high irrigation efficiencies with pivots or linears or solid sets or drip irrigation. And a lot of these growers here are now putting those because they're being subsidized by the state. But there's one important thing to remember, and Terry brought it up in passing, distribution uniformity. You can apply the right amount, but if it's not distributed well, you're under irrigating parts of the field and over irrigating parts of the field. So sometimes in a typical, let's say a solid set sprinkler system, because of wind distortions, your best distribution uniformity on the average is going to be 85%. So you have to irrigate a little more than ET just to make sure everything's irrigated adequately. So distribution uniformity cannot be ignored, and it's often ignored because you have to account for that. Now,
so
before we're closing this discussion, what?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Before closing,
go ahead.
I want to stress one thing. Regardless of irrigation system, regardless if it's furrow or basin or sprinkler or drip, you still need your leaching requirement. So that's your limit. ET plus required leaching is your absolute limit.
Okay.
So there's no magic bullet to an improved irrigation efficiency. Salinity management is ultimately your limit to improved irrigation efficiency.
So this is fascinating. Terry, your way. So learning from Charlie about surface flood irrigation and what those runs mean in terms of distance, trying to disperse the water so it goes down evenly. And if you have high infiltration rates, the inlet side has more water infiltration than the other side. But with pivot and linear, Terry, let's talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to turn this back to soil in a second here. But Terry, talk a little bit about the advancements you're seeing in pivot and linear and other types of irrigation methods that you've witnessed.
Yeah, I really think this is both a fascinating conversation as well as complex. We are running out of water. I think we are going to be as a continent, North America. My feelings are we will run out of water before we run out of land. And so trying to create more and more, increasingly more efficiency of our irrigation system becomes imperative because, we will still have a limited amount of land and an increasing population, regardless of where we are. So in many of our areas, growers have moved away from furrow irrigation because, as Charlie indicated, the top of the furrow, the inlet, you end up with a much larger amount of water, a greater amount of leaching. But there's another point in this, that in those furrows in the intake, you tend to remove the organic matter, the activated carbon. Your soil health has a tendency to decrease. Soil health is a measurement of organic matter, and you're moving it down to the end of the fields in some of these furrows. So they've introduced linears. Linears has linear irrigation, has some improvements over furrow in our area. And now the advanced are coming into pivot irrigation, with many of them are taking down swing arms, but they're establishing within their fields, within the soil moisture monitoring equipment that relates to a grower on satellites, how much water potential is within the system, and relates that back to delivery of water within a pivot. More advances are coming in now for drip irrigation or these drag lines, always to increase the amount of efficiency. And I've got a grower this past year on potatoes that established drip irrigation on his potatoes. 80 to 90%, Rob, of onion production in the Treasure Valley of Idaho is now under drip irrigation. And they're all controlled by soil sensors that relate exactly how much moisture is being applied, trying to get the efficiencies of water down to, from less than 50% up to that 90% water use efficiency, which increases the efficiency of soluble nutrients like sulfur and nitrate that are leached out.
So one of the guests that's attending, Jack, asked the question: is Southern Alberta, they've got some fields, background levels of manure, etc., and the nutrient levels are quite high. The water itself, or the water in the soils, are high in sulfur, yet they're applying elemental sulfur and boron actually, and really popping the canola yields. Any thought on that, Terry?
Well, I'm thinking that high levels of manure, high levels of phosphorus, you generally come along with it. They're still making a recommendation for phosphorus and a sulfur being applied as part of a soluble source of sulfur that's immediately available to the crop and placed where the early root growth and development, even under cold soil conditions, can access those levels of available sulfur, available phosphorus. So, Rob, even though you have high levels of nutrients, quite often applications of a soluble source at planting, cold, wet soils, you don't have a lot of microorganisms, you don't have a lot of movement, some saturated conditions. I make recommendations for nutrients to be applied on a starter blend all the time, and I'm not alone.
Hey, just a quick question from the audience here. What's the organic matter? I'm going to come to you, Dr. Sanchez. Terry, what's the organic matter, the soils that you're kind of working with up in that Pacific Northwest and typically on the irrigated land? What kind of organic matters?
Yeah, we pray for organic matters right at 2%, and we feel lucky if it's around 1%, organic matter in some of those soils. Very, very low organic matter.
Charlie, down your way, what are organic matters?
Oh, we're well below 1, and you can't change it. You can load up and load up and load up, and we get 120-degree days in June. So just at the end of a summer, you're right back where you started.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's an equilibrium with our climate.
Technology is moving ahead right now, like variable rate irrigation, VRI, variable rate irrigation. And Terry, if you had a pivot and you were doing zone, or you're doing soil testing, so you might do by the acre or zone soil testing, and you discovered that there could be differences in soil texture across that pivot. And maybe Dr. Sanchez, same question to you. Could you justify the utilization of elemental sulfur at different rates across that pivot?
Oh, well, that becomes a good question. Maybe it's related to organic matter. I know that in soils where organic matter is decreased, sulfur responses to crops become less. And so you could, in mapping out a soil, where you've got high calcium carbonate contents, very low organic matter, you could have variable rates, zones where you might have a variable rate of sulfur. I could see it. Generally in a field there may be five zones of application, and but the variable rate of irrigation, on a side slope or something like that. Yeah, they're working on it and keenly striving to address those very questions right now.
But I know we do VR variable rate lime. So in certain
Yeah.
soils where there's some issues, variable rate sulfur. Brooke, have you heard anybody doing that, or is that just I'm lobbing a question to you, not expected? But
Yeah, no, I haven't heard of a great deal of variable rate application. Our product is relatively cheap per pound, so I think generally the SOP for that is just a fairly large broadcast on a maybe bi-yearly or tri-yearly basis.
Yeah.
And just hoping to raise the sulfur level across the whole field.
yeah, I don't know of a situation where the application of elemental sulfur would necessarily do harm to a soil. But Dr. Sanchez, I got a question here from Chile. We have somebody from Chile on here, and they said that the application of elemental sulfur in Chile is restricted, and something to do with electrical connectivity. Have you ever heard of that? Like, I mean, I'm trying to wrestle with why elemental.
No, it could happen. It could happen. You're making gypsum, and gypsum is a neutral salt.
Okay.
So if you make more gypsum, you will increase the EC, and that has management implications. Maybe you should, for example, if you're growing a salt-sensitive crop like lettuce, maybe you should put your gypsum or elemental sulfur on the crop before the lettuce. Of course, I have to give some context to what I'm saying. Here we farm year round, all year round.
Yep.
So there's other crops. So that does have management implications because you are making gypsum, and gypsum is a neutral soluble salt, and EC can go up. Absolutely.
So it would so tying that together with the soil test and understanding that carbonate level and and working that all together would be a pretty important agronomic.
Soil and water test is key.
Yeah.
And the criteria to use them have all been worked out. This isn't an emerging technology. We're there.
So we have some farmers on the participation panel that I know are just getting started into irrigation. They're just going to start putting pivots on right now and just starting to move forward. Terry, do you have any advice for them as they get started on their new irrigation career?
Well, it becomes just establishing a pivot is just the beginning, of increased production agriculture, but it's not the ending. You should be patient, but it's interesting. I know the J.R. Simplot company has potato production and for processing potatoes in Portage, as you know, in Portage La Prairie, and they do not release a contract unless what? Unless you've got an irrigation source, a pivot. Now, as irrigation concerns decrease, as irrigation concerns increase in the arable area of the West, there's expected to be more and more vegetable production into Western Canada, Saskatchewan, for example. And I would say that there's great opportunities, if the government of Canada will get everything together and move forward with irrigation out of Lake Diefenbaker.
Lake Diefenbaker, yeah, and the South Saskatchewan River, yep.
Yeah, so there's more than 1 million hectares of land that's opening up. I think that's a great opportunity, but get good advice, be patient, work on those applications. And Canadian growers and developers are some of the best in the world. They'll get it figured out. It just won't be immediate. You can hope for the best, and you'll work out these problems and concerns very shortly.
Dr. Sanchez, what are some of the we got closing in on 5 minutes left. I'm going to leave the last word to Brooke here, but What are some of the technologies that you are excited about with respect to monitoring evapotranspiration rates, soil infiltration rates, water utilization, how to determine how much water to put on? What are some of the things that you're kind of turned on about with respect to that?
This has been my focus the past 7 years because of the water challenges in the West. We're developing algorithms. We're exploiting satellite data. We can predict water use from satellite data. We had ground truth that with eddy covariance systems. We're beginning to weave AI, artificial intelligence, into some of the decision support processes. I think as the state of California begins to implement their policies, growers will be encouraged to use less fertilizer. And I think variable rate fertilizer application hasn't even begun to be exploited like it should. You mentioned variable rate irrigation. I'm all in on variable rate fertilizer application. Terry knows that. He's had a role in seeing me get funded on that. I'm not all in on variable rate irrigation.
Okay. Because
you're trading water for diesel. You have to go over the sandy spots more often and the clay spots less frequently. I just don't see that as having practical application. But that's my opinion. And it's not a technology foreign to me. We have the infrastructure to do that here at our research center. But you do the math and you're trading water for diesel.
All
and
right.
it doesn't work.
Yeah, this is really gonna be cool to spend more time with you. I head back down on Friday, and next week you and I are gonna get together and chase some of these ideas around a little bit. Brooke, thanks to Keg River for sponsoring these kind of events. They live on timelessly because agronomics don't change that much. I mean, soil structure and our practices might change, but basic soil chemistry and the application of these fundamental principles to agriculture production don't. And Charlie, to your point, a lot of people forget stuff. Like we motor along, and then all of a sudden you go, geez, 35 years ago we did something that worked. We should try that again. So Brooke, why are you sponsoring these webinars? What is it that you want to try to achieve by doing this?
Well, over the last several years, we've really amped up our we just want to provide more general information to the ag world that we're participating in, and that's really has driven what we've done with our website and these kinds of forums. Anyway, I want to thank all of you guys for participating in this. This has been just a fantastic information exchange, and I think that it probably raises more questions that can be easily answered by all the people that support AgVisor Pro. And I think that individual questions should be put on that app, and you'll get some fantastic answers in a very short time.
Yeah, AgVisor Pro is an agnostic and unbiased communication platform for agriculture. It's free to download on iOS and Android. Keg River is one of the many companies that you can access there. And I'm going to get Charlie on there as one of the experts that he can answer some questions, but I got to get his phone in my hand. And oh yeah, Terry, you too. Both of you guys are guilty. So anyways, we'll get you guys on, and then the listeners will be able to track you guys down and ask you guys questions. Anyways, want to thank Keg River, and want to thank Everbrave for coordinating the whole webinar. This has been fantastic. Thanks to the audience, and best success in the growing season of 2024 and beyond. And if we can be of any help, just reach out to us on AgVisor Pro and buy some of that good Keg River elemental degradable sulfur, because it's darn good stuff, I'll tell you what.